I've always been the kind of person who keeps everything inside. From a young age, I learned to smile even when my heart was shattered. But there came a point in my life when the pain became unbearable. Everything seemed perfect on the outside, but inside, it felt like I was slowly falling apart, and no one around me could see it. That's when I realized I couldn't keep pretending, but even then, I didn't know what to do. I'm Rachel Harper. Today, I'm sharing a story that highlights the deep struggles many face behind closed doors. This story is based on real events, but some names and details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. If this story resonates with you, please consider sharing, liking, and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Now let's get into today's story. My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a content creator on YouTube. If you looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably say it seems perfect. I was born in a small town in the US, grew up in a family everyone thought was picture perfect. Mom, dad, and 2 younger brothers, always together, always happy. But what no one knew was that, even as a child, I felt something different. A kind of sadness I couldn't explain. Deep down, I always thought I was just being overly sensitive, that it was just a phase. When I was 10, things started to change. My parents, who seemed to have the ideal marriage, began arguing more and more until they eventually got divorced. I didn't realize it then, but that event shook me to my core. Over time, the feelings of emptiness and anxiety began to intensify. I would wake up each day with an unexplainable sense of dread, even during moments that should have made me happy, like birthday parties or family vacations. That's when I started to understand something was wrong, but I had no idea what it was. As the years passed, what started as a mild sadness grew into something much heavier. I felt like a hole was forming inside me. By the time I was 13, that emptiness was a constant companion. Even when I was surrounded by friends, I felt alone, disconnected from the world around me. I started losing interest in the things that once made me happy: music, sports, even hanging out with my friends. The worst part was the anxiety. It felt like my heart was running a marathon for no reason, and just the thought of going to school would turn my stomach. People around me didn't notice what was happening. My parents were wrapped up in their own struggles after the divorce, and my teachers just thought I was a perfectionist, someone who was too hard on herself. What they didn't realize was that the perfectionism was my way of trying to control the chaos I felt inside. I cried almost every day after school, hidden away in my room, but outside I kept smiling, pretending everything was okay. My friends? They saw me as the happy girl, always ready to help, but they had no idea how much I struggled just to get out of bed. It was around this time that my relationships began to fall apart. I withdrew from many friends, and the few relationships I held onto were marked by misunderstandings and conflict. No one could understand why I was always so distant, so in my own world. Slowly, I shut myself off from everyone, leaving only sadness as my constant companion. The most intense crises started when I was around 16. I remember waking up one day and just not being able to get out of bed. It felt like my body was glued to the sheets while my mind sank into dark thoughts, spiraling into an endless pit. I remember staring at the ceiling for hours, unable to move a muscle. All I wanted was to disappear, to dissolve into some corner where no one could find me. The emotional pain felt so real, like every part of me was broken. One particular episode stands out. I had just ended a 4-year relationship, an abusive one that only worsened my mental state. I had hoped that breaking up would make me feel free, but the opposite happened. The rejection hit me like a brutal blow. I spent weeks isolated at home, ignoring calls from my parents and the few friends I had left. The curtains stayed closed, and daylight felt too harsh. I avoided life, avoided any contact with the outside world. Everything felt suffocating. During this time, I completely lost any sense of self-care. I couldn't even manage simple tasks like showering or eating properly. My parents grew more concerned, but I couldn't explain what I was feeling. When they visited, I'd smile, tell them I was just tired, that everything was fine. But as soon as they left, I would sink back into the darkness. I tried different ways to cope with these crises, but nothing seemed to work. Sometimes I'd think that a day of rest or being alone would help, but the truth was, I was fooling myself. In the beginning, I had no idea how to face what I was feeling, and many times, it led me to believe the only solution was to give up on everything. Suicidal thoughts started to creep in, and that was a battle I wasn't ready to fight. After years of trying to carry that weight on my own, there came a day when I realized I couldn't go on like that. I was completely exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor, crying uncontrollably, and thinking I had no strength left. It was in that moment that something inside me cried out for help, even though I was still full of doubt and fear. The idea of seeking treatment terrified me. For me, therapy felt like a sign of weakness, and I feared the judgment of others. I was raised to be strong, especially because of my Christian faith, and part of me believed that if I just prayed hard enough, it would all go away. Plus, the thought of taking medication like antidepressants felt like admitting I had failed in some way. The resistance was so strong that for months, I convinced myself I could figure it out on my own. But it was my mom who, one day, gently led me into a serious conversation. She saw how deeply I was sinking, and with the patience only a mother can have, she explained that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but of courage. She told me she couldn't bear to see her daughter suffering like that anymore, and that I deserved to feel better. That conversation hit me hard. For the first time, I allowed myself to think that maybe what I was going through wasn't something I could fix on my own. With encouragement from her and a few friends, I scheduled my first therapy session. I walked into the office with my heart in my throat, ready to give up at any moment. But when I left, I realized that taking that step was crucial. In the first few sessions, I couldn't fully open up, but slowly, I began to share my pain, the constant fear of disappointing others, and the guilt that consumed me. My therapist helped me see that what I was carrying couldn't be solved by sheer willpower, but with care, with kindness towards myself. The decision to start taking antidepressants was another difficult step. My faith had always been an important part of my life, and the idea of relying on something chemical to feel better was an enormous internal conflict. However, after many conversations with my therapist and a doctor, I realized that medication could be a tool, a bridge to help me climb out of the hole I was in. When I finally accepted that, I began to feel a bit of relief, as if I was finally allowing myself to receive the help I so desperately needed. Over time, I began to realize that depression wasn't something I could just make disappear overnight. But I did learn that there were ways to manage it, to make it feel less suffocating. Medication was one of the first things that made a real difference. It wasn't an instant miracle, but slowly the thick fog that had been hanging over me started to lift. My mind felt clearer, and I could see things with a little more perspective. The negative thoughts didn't consume me as much, and that small shift gave me the strength to start looking for other ways to improve. One of the biggest sources of support during this time was my faith. I've always had a strong connection to spirituality, and praying became a way to feel less alone in my darkest moments. It was like, even when I couldn't talk to anyone else, I could find some comfort in my silent conversations with God. I also joined a small support group at my church, where people who were also facing emotional struggles shared their stories. Hearing other people's experiences, feeling the empathy of those who truly understood what I was going through, was an incredible relief. I wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. Therapy, on the other hand, helped me confront so many wounds I had been ignoring since childhood. I had carried so much pain and guilt over the years, especially from my parents' divorce and the pressures I placed on myself. Slowly, I started to understand that I didn't have to carry all of that on my own. My therapist taught me how to be kinder to myself, how to stop being so hard on myself. Those lessons transformed the way I saw my depression. I used to think it defined me, but now I was starting to see that it was just a part of me, not the whole of who I am. I also began to incorporate new habits into my life. One of them was exercise. At first, it was hard to even imagine leaving the house for a walk, but over time, I realized that on the days I pushed myself to move, I felt a slight improvement in my mood and energy. I made it a routine, not because I thought it would fix everything, but because it helped me face each day, one step at a time. There were also small moments of relief that seemed insignificant, but changed my outlook. One day, after months of therapy and medication, I found myself smiling while listening to a song I loved. It was something so simple, but so meaningful. These moments, though small, showed me that recovery wasn't one big event, but a series of small steps that, together, made a difference. There was one specific moment that profoundly marked my journey. After months of therapy, medication, and support, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a mental health conference. My first reaction was panic. Public speaking had always been one of my biggest anxieties. The idea of standing in front of an audience, vulnerable, exposing the most sensitive part of my life, seemed impossible. My first instinct was to decline, but something inside me made me hesitate. I thought about how far I had come, about the small victories that had brought me to that moment. And despite the fear, I said yes. On the day of the conference, as I waited backstage, my hands were shaking, and my heart was racing. With every passing minute, the familiar feeling of social anxiety crept in. But this time, something was different. I knew I was there for a bigger reason. As I stepped onto the stage, the initial nervousness quickly gave way to a sense of purpose. When I began to speak, I shared my story, my pain, but also my triumphs. I saw the faces in the audience, listening intently, and I realized that every word I spoke carried the weight of my journey. It was the first time I felt victorious, not just for being there, but for everything I had overcome to get to that moment. Looking back, I realized it wasn't just about speaking in public. That experience showed me that even on my hardest days, when all I could manage was getting out of the house or simply getting out of bed, those were victories too. Small wins, like enjoying a song, laughing at something silly, or even completing a walk, were all signs of progress, even if I didn't see them at the time. But the biggest victory of all was overcoming the suicidal thoughts that once haunted me. I reached a point where, though depression was still a part of me, I no longer let it control my life. I realized that every time I chose to keep going, even through the pain, it was a victory. And instead of looking for grand moments of triumph, I started to value each small win, because together, they created a bigger transformation. Today, as I look back, I can see my life with much more clarity. The struggle with depression is still a reality. It's not something that just vanishes overnight. There are harder days when that old sadness tries to creep back in, but now I feel equipped. I'm no longer a prisoner to those dark thoughts that once consumed me. Now, I know that depression is part of my story, but it's not who I am. It doesn't define me. I've learned to recognize the signs before things spiral out of control, and each day, I use the tools I've developed throughout this journey. Therapy, meditation, my faith, and even the simple moments of self-care. These are all resources that help me maintain balance. I've come to understand that I don't have to face everything alone. Learning to ask for help has been one of the most valuable lessons. Before, I was so afraid of being judged, of seeming weak. But now I see that real strength is in admitting when we need support. If there's one thing I'd like to say to anyone going through this, it's don't give up. There are days when it feels like the pain will never end, like the darkness is permanent. But I promise, better days will come. It might sound cliché, but it's the truth. With every small victory, whether it's getting out of bed, going for a walk, or even allowing yourself to feel joy for a moment, You are making progress. My life now has more meaning. I appreciate the little things more, and I'm kinder to myself. I've come to understand that living is about accepting the highs and lows without letting the hard moments completely overwhelm me. I want everyone going through this battle to know that they are not alone. The road to recovery is long, but every step counts, and it's possible to find hope, even in the darkest of times. Depression has taught me many things, but the most important lesson has been about self-compassion. For years, I was my own harshest critic, always thinking I wasn't doing enough, that I should be stronger. But the truth is, kindness, patience, and recognizing my own limits were the keys to starting my healing. Accepting that I didn't have to face everything alone, and that asking for help was an act of courage, transformed the way I see myself and the world. Now I know that recovery is a continuous journey. I can't ignore the need for therapy, medication, or my faith. Each of these tools plays a critical role in how I manage depression. And I've also learned to cherish moments of joy, no matter how small. Before, I couldn't see the beauty in the little things. A coffee with a friend, sunlight streaming through the window, a song that makes me smile. But today, those small things remind me that life, despite its challenges, still has so much to offer. My message to anyone going through this is simple. You are not alone. The fight can feel endless, and I know how hard it is to believe that better days are ahead when you're in the middle of the darkness. But I promise, every small victory is proof that you are capable of overcoming this. Don't be afraid to seek help, whether from a professional, a friend, or something that brings comfort to your soul. And remember, every step forward, no matter how small, is a step toward a lighter life. Believe me, better days will come. You deserve those days. With all my gratitude, Clara.
We've reached the end of Clara's inspiring story. Her words are a powerful reminder that, even when the road is tough and full of challenges, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. The battle against depression is a journey of ups and downs, but every small step toward recovery is a victory. If this story touched you or someone you know, don't hesitate to seek help. We're not alone in our struggles, and sharing our experiences can bring comfort and hope to those who need it most. We'd love to hear your story. Do you have something you'd like to share? Leave your thoughts in the comments and help us build this community of support and empathy. Your voice matters. If you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Remember, every little victory counts, and it's never too late to ask for help. We're in this together.